You are a disgrace to this hospital.
Stop, please, just stop.
Sir.
Please step back, you need to leave.
I'm not going anywhere. Call
There are men
security.
who have never once in their adult lives heard the word no and meant it. Calvin Hargrove was one of them. He had spent 38 years moving through a world that rearranged itself around his convenience, and he had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of your own house settling. This is the story of the one afternoon that did not rearrange itself for him. The corridor outside the private patient wing at Sinai Grace Medical Center in Detroit was usually quiet at 2 in the afternoon. Calvin Hargrove was standing in the middle of it, phone in one hand, the other hand raised slightly in a universal gesture of a man who believes he is owed something and is growing impatient waiting for it to arrive. His father, the founder of Hargrove Real Estate Holdings, was 2 rooms down, recovering from a minor cardiac procedure that the hospital's chief cardiologist had described twice as routine. Calvin had been at the hospital for 40 minutes. He had asked for an update twice. He had been told both times, with the particular patience of someone trained to deliver the same answer calmly no matter how many times it is demanded, that the doctor would be out shortly. The nurse standing in front of him now was named Imani Reid. She was 31 years old, 7 months pregnant, and she had been on her feet for 5.5 hours of a 12-hour shift. She explained for the second time that the surgical team was finishing the post-procedure assessment and that someone would update him within the next 15 minutes. Calvin looked at her for a moment. He said, "Do you know how much my time costs per minute? More than you'll make this year." He said it smiling. The way you say something you expect to land is a joke. The way a man says something cruel while fully expecting the room to laugh along with him, because it always had before. Imani did not laugh. Calvin's hand moved before either of them had fully processed it. The slap landed across her cheek with a sound that seemed, for a moment, louder than the corridor could hold. He was still smiling when his hand came back down to his side. Imani stood very still. She put one hand against the nurse's station counter beside her, steadying herself. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She looked at Calvin for exactly 2 seconds. The way you look at something you have already decided does not deserve more of your attention than that. And then she turned, finished writing a note in the chart she had been holding, and walked toward the break room. Calvin watched her go. He adjusted his cuff. He went back to his phone. He had no idea, in that moment, that the woman he had just struck had a brother named Marcus Reid, and that Marcus Reid's name appeared, at that very moment, on 2 separate documents, sitting in 2 separate filing systems inside Sinai Grace Medical Center's administrative offices. One as lead litigator for the law firm currently representing the hospital system in an unrelated contract dispute, and the other, less publicly known, as a sitting member of the State Medical Licensing Review Board, the body that would hear any formal complaint filed against a physician, an administrator, or, under a clause most people never bother to read, any donor whose name appeared on hospital property. Calvin's family foundation had, 6 weeks earlier, finalized a 7-figure donation that would place the Hargrove name on the hospital's new cardiac wing. Calvin did not know any of this. He had never asked who Imani Reid was. He had never asked who anyone in a nursing uniform was. He had built an entire adult life on the assumption that the people performing services for him existed in a category that did not require further inquiry. Imani Reid had grown up on Detroit's east side, the youngest of 3 children raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and kept a photograph of her own mother, Imani's grandmother, taped inside every locker she'd ever used, in every job she'd ever held, as a quiet reminder where she came from and what she was building toward. Imani had continued the tradition. Inside her locker at Sinai Grace, taped inside of the door, was a small photograph of her mother, who had passed 3 years earlier. Imani touched it before every shift. She had touched it that morning, the way she always did, before walking onto the floor. She had become a labor and delivery nurse 12 years earlier, after watching her own mother survive a difficult birth with Imani's youngest sibling, and deciding, at 17, that she wanted to be the person in the room who made sure no one else's mother went through that alone. She was good at her job. She was respected by her colleagues. She was, at this particular moment in her life, 7 months pregnant with her first child and determined to work through as much of her pregnancy as her body would allow, because she had built her entire identity around being present for people on the hardest day of their lives, and she did not intend to stop being present a moment before she had to. Her older brother Marcus had taken a different path. He had gone to law school on a full scholarship, clerked for a federal judge, and built a career as a litigator known for a particular kind of quiet, devastating thoroughness. He did not raise his voice in courtrooms. He did not need to. He had been appointed to the State Medical Licensing Review Board 4 years earlier, a position that required almost none of his time in any given month, and that he had nearly declined, except that his sister had told him, half joking, that it would be useful to have a Reid somewhere inside the system that governed the hospitals where she worked. She had not meant it as anything more than a joke at the time. Charge Nurse Patricia Owusu had been standing at the nurse's station 15 feet away when the slap happened. She had worked at Sinai Grace for 19 years. She had seen entitled family members raise their voices before. She had never, in 19 years, watched one of them strike a member of her staff. She did not wait for Imani to file a report. She did not wait for a supervisor to ask what happened. She walked directly to the hospital security office, requested the hallway footage from the private wing corridor for the 2 o'clock hour, and had it pulled and timestamped within 20 minutes. Then she called the hospital's chief of staff directly and said, "I need you to see this before the end of the day." Imani sat in the break room for 10 minutes after it happened. She pressed a cool paper towel against her cheek. A colleague offered call security on her behalf. Imani said quietly, "Let Patricia handle it. I need to finish my shift." When the colleague asked her, gently, how she was holding up, Imani looked at the small mirror above the break room sink for a moment. Then she said, "I have been touched by worse hands than his. I just never let any of them decide how my day would end." She finished her shift. She clocked out at the normal time. She drove home. That evening, 12 miles away at the Detroit Athletic Club, Calvin Hargrove was telling the story to a small group of donors gathered for a hospital foundation reception. The same reception celebrating the cardiac wing that would soon bear his family's name. He told the story of an entitled staff member who had given him attitude about his father's care. He did not mention the slap. He laughed about it. The way you laugh about something when you have already decided, without examining the decision very closely, that nothing about it requires you to feel differently than you did 5 minutes ago. The people around him laughed too, in the polite and slightly uncertain way people laugh at a story told by someone whose money they are hoping to receive more of. None of them knew, yet, that the security footage from that afternoon had already reached the desk of Sinai Grace's chief of staff, who had watched it twice in silence and then placed a call to the hospital's general counsel. The hospital board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday morning. It was meant to be a routine session, budget review, a presentation on the cardiac wing's construction timeline, a vote on 2 new department hires. Marcus Reid was not typically present for routine hospital board sessions. His role on the State Licensing Review Board operated at arm's length from individual hospital governance. He attended this one. He sat quietly through the budget review. He sat quietly through construction update, which included a rendering of the new wing's entrance, the Hargrove family name in brush steel lettering above the door. When the floor opened for general business, Marcus stood. He did not raise his voice. He had built an entire career on not needing to. He said, "I'd like the board to be aware of an incident that occurred in this hospital's private wing corridor last Thursday at approximately 2 in the afternoon." He described it plainly. The slap, the smile afterward, the nurse who had absorbed it without retaliation and finished her shift. Then he said, "Her name is Imani Reid." He let that sit in a room for a moment. Then he said, "Do you know whose sister you let him hit?" The room was silent. He said, "Mine." The chief of staff, who had already seen the footage, did not need convincing. The board's general counsel, who understood immediately the conflict represented by a Hargrove Foundation naming rights agreement, sitting beside a documented assault by a Hargrove family member against hospital staff, did not need convincing either. The naming rights agreement was placed under formal review within the week. The construction signage was paused pending the outcome. Calvin's father, recovering and unaware of any of this until his own legal team informed him, was reportedly far less forgiving of his son's conduct than Calvin had anticipated. Not out of moral conviction, multiple people close to the family would later suggest, but because a 7-figure donation now hung in legal limbo over what he considered an entirely avoidable embarrassment. Calvin's calls to the hospital went unreturned for several days. When he was finally granted a meeting with the chief of staff, he arrived expecting an apology to be extracted from a hospital for the inconvenience of the inquiry. He left having been informed that the matter had been referred, separately, to the State Licensing Review Board for consideration of whether the Hargrove Foundation's continued association with any state-regulated medical facility required formal review. Marcus Reid recused himself from that specific review, as procedure required. He did not need to be in the room for it to proceed. The footage spoke clearly enough on its own. 6 weeks later, Imani gave birth to a healthy daughter. She returned to work 4 months after that. The same locker, the same photograph of her mother taped inside the door. A local news outlet, covering the broader story of the Foundation's Naming Rights Review, reached out to Imani for comment. She agreed to a brief statement. Delivered calmly in the hospital's family waiting area, her daughter's photo visible on the lock screen of the phone she held. She said, "I've spent 12 years in this building making sure people felt safe on the worst day of their lives. I did not do this work to be reminded that some people think safety is only for people who can pay for it. I am glad the hospital saw what I already knew to be true, but I would have come back to work either way. This is who I am, regardless of what anyone decides I'm worth." She did not mention her brother. She did not need to. The story had already made its way through every department in the hospital by then, told and retold in break rooms and nurses' stations, always ending the same way. Patricia Owusu, weeks later, stopped by the locker room before her own shift. Imani's locker door was open, the small photograph still taped inside, the way it always was. Patricia stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then she closed the locker door gently, the way you close something you decided to protect, and went back to her rounds. She had worked 19 years at Sinai Grace. She had seen a great many things. She had never seen someone absorb a blow like that and not be diminished by it. She thought about it for the rest of her shift. She stayed standing. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who has ever been underestimated by someone who never bothered to ask who they were. And tell me in the comments, who do you think delivered the real consequence, Marcus or the hospital board? I will see you in the next story.